Hello, welcome to another episode of the New News Review, G.I. Joe New News Review. I am joined by my special guest, the former Vice President of Global Brand Management of Hasbro and former senior of Midway Games.
Senior manager, senior brand
Senior
manager.
manager of Midway Games. Sorry, manager of Midway Games. Uh, and co-founder of the of LLC Blue Milk, and the 2001 as brand director of GI Joe, Derryl DePriest.
Hey there. Nice to talk to you, David.
It is a pleasure to see you again. We run in the same circle, so we once in a while run into each other at a convention or two or whatever. And it's been a pleasure sometimes sitting next to you in panels, sitting just chit chatting at a convention while you're selling toys, which I find very like weird that you're selling toys at a convention when I remember the first time I met you, Star Wars Celebration, and you were running around that Star Wars brand section talking to people, 2 minutes here, 2 minutes there, 2 minutes. I was like, God, this guy's got to be a marathon runner because he's trying to hit all these people and keep going. So it's been a wonderful journey from when I first met you to now.
Yep, and you summed up my life right there as both a fan and a professional toy marketer. So I think we're done. Thanks. Have a good one. See ya.
And if anybody doesn't know, Derryl DePriest has got a very, very good sense of humor.
That's right.
I would like to go into a little bit of your credits of the things that you've accomplished in your life, if you don't mind. A lot of this stuff probably people are not aware of.
Yep.
I did a little bit of research, and in our discussions, I knew a little bit. So
that's right. So the audience knows. We've talked for hours at the last couple of toy shows we've been at, and that's one of the benefits of now living here in Chattanooga. So after my time at Hasbro ended in 2018, my wife and I moved to Chattanooga, Tennessee, where A, she had family, and B, it's super inexpensive to live here. So those were two motivating factors. And but the other benefit of Chattanooga is it's right equidistant from Nashville and the toy shows there, Atlanta, the toy shows there. So it's actually been a great place to actually go back to physical toy shows. That's where I met you, David, and we've talked for hours, and you've been around as I've talked about, my experiences on different brands. So anyway.
And it's a pleasure, and not a lot of people can point you out in a crowd and tell their friends, that's Derryl DePriest. He's the brand manager of Hasbro. They're like, who the hell is Derryl DePriest? Like, well, then that's your problem. Get the hell out of here.
Right. Sure.
Because you worked on a lot of the cool stuff that I love. So
I've been very, very fortunate. Very fortunate that early in my career. Well, let me. So do you want? So I'll tell you a little bit about how my career got started. But it's really important to know. Oh, go ahead. Seems like you want to ask a question.
Can I get these credits out of the way before?
Oh yeah, of course. Sorry.
I have all that stuff in my questions for you, so I'm gonna get to it all.
Sure.
So let's see. This is interesting, folks. You're going to find this very interesting about Derryl. I found it very interesting. He went to school for neuroscience, and he studied biology and psychology, and he worked on monkeys, and he did temporal studies and extraretinal studies.
Wow. You did your homework.
This is interesting because it's going to come back around. Trust me. He's the author of Star Wars: The Vintage Collection Archive. He's the author of Collecting G.I. Joe, an official guide to his action-packed world. He worked in the video game industry for a while at Atari. He was a product manager and marketing manager on games like Rush 1 and 2, Mortal Kombat, Special Forces, Army Men, War, Final Assault, Mace, Dark Age, 3D Hockey, Area 51, and Primal Rage. And are those all correct? Did I get anything wrong there?
No, I think you're right. You just reminded me of some good times, and and really fondly remember titles. Working with the teams, especially at Atari. Fantastic. But it also reminds me how old I am. So,
It is
but
strange.
that's
It, it
that's
is,
part of the deal. So,
but it is strange you having the background in neuroscience and all that stuff, that you can think like back 40 years ago and vividly remember memories, certain vivid memories and stuff. I'm getting off my script here, but I find this interesting. But now you're 40 years hence, and you're like, that doesn't feel like 40 years ago.
no, no, no. In fact, so much of my life has been I feel like a kid still, and I had a fantastic childhood. My childhood, I grew up in San Diego, and we I have two younger brothers, and we were just able to run and play all year round there. And our parents, it was a different time when it was very safe for you to wander from neighborhood to neighborhood on your bike or skateboard or whatever you did. But fantastic memories growing up, and it was all, I came to realize later when I was in my 20s that that the toys that I played with, or toys I grew up with, that's another story. Toys I grew up with really shaped who I became.
Yeah.
And that's why, after an initial career arc, wanting to become a scientist, I completely changed careers to want to be in the toy industry. For two reasons. One, growing up, my childhood was sandwiched between 12-inch GI Joe, the Adventure Team GI Joe in the 70s, and Star Wars in the late 70s and early 80s. I played with everything in between, but the memories of that were just incredible. And later I realized that it's those toys really created it gave me the tools to create personal narratives for storytelling. And that was such an important part of my childhood. Later on, I wanted to kind of give back to that. Once I was kind of in graduate school, I was kind of trying to figure out what really made me happy. What did I really want to do? So, despite having, been a co-author on several neuroscience papers, I decided that, I really wanted to go into the toy industry. That's what I wanted to do. But that's another story we can touch on. Like how that actually happened is
Well, that's a
interesting.
question, trust me, because I found it fascinating when you told it to me, and I know that the viewers out there are going to absolutely eat it all up when they hear it. But you touched on your childhood, you touched on the toys that you collected, and your beginnings in that world that ended up being your world eventually for quite a large part of your life.
Yep.
Talk a little bit more about your beginnings, what GI Joes you liked, where GI Joe came to you, what year, what period, all that stuff, because that's what the fans really care about, is how you became a GI Joe fan.
Sure. So very let's see, a few years ago, maybe a decade ago, I was going through some of my old belongings. And if folks don't know, I am a collector. So first and foremost, that'll probably be what's on my gravestone is, or my epitaph, or the whatever's printed in the paper, obituary. That's what it's called. It'll say collector, then followed by family man. It's, I can't help what I am. I am a collector to the core. And about a decade ago, I was going through some of my older boxes of just stuff from my childhood that I'd put away. I found a fat stack of Kodak color prints that I had taken when I was a kid And what I used to do is I would take my GI Joes, my 12-inch Adventure Team GI Joes. And if anyone's not familiar with the original Adventure Team, the 12-inch GI Joes from the 70s, one of the greatest toy lines without question of all time. It was a complete, pivot away from the military era GI Joe of the 1960s. Hasbro amazingly pivoted from military to adventure and embrace all the cool stuff of the times in the 70s, but really erased that stigma of what was perceived as a military toy and had the second great renaissance of GI Joe. And that's where I grew up with toys under the Christmas tree. But anyway, I found this fat stack of photos. What I used to do as a kid, and I had forgotten this, was I used to take all the accessories of GI Joe. And when I was a kid, I was buying and selling toys. As a kid, I was buying and selling.
He was a vendor
toys
and he was a child.
and comic books. No, seriously, when I was 12 years old,
Wow.
I would have toys that I would collect, which was GI Joe. I'd have toys that I would buy and sell, like Hot Wheels and other things like that. And I would even sell Playboy magazines when I was 12 years old.
What?
I was buying Playboys from hippies at the swap meet and putting together complete collections and making a good amount of money. And I would take that and I would buy toys. I'd buy the toys that people were selling as they were aging out of their childhood. So our family, when I was a kid, I probably had 50 GI Joes, and most of them were used. Some of them I got under the Christmas tree. But anyway, back to the story. So this stack of Kodak images I found, what I would used to do is I would take all the accessories for GI Joe and I'd take them outside in the sun and I'd put them on like color backgrounds, and I would photograph all the rifles together, all the helmets together, all the all the accessories together. And I guess it was my way of curating my collection. This is something I did when I was 10, 11, 12 years old. So, and it turns out that curation is an important part of being a collector, especially when you're a kid, because you're trying to impart order on an otherwise like very wide and unstructured, chaotic world. So I would be trying to impart this order and categorize everything. And unfortunately, I must have tossed those photos. I should have kept them. They were very crude, very simple for the time. But it was clear that I was expressing collector tendencies even when I was, say, 10 years old, because that's the way I interacted with in addition to playing GI Joe, that's the way I would interact with it. And that's, I think it's very important because even early on, I was a collector. As I entered high school, I put my, toys away, packed them very carefully away, but, and I didn't really interact with them much, except I bought a few things here and there. But then when I was in my 20s, traveling across country to go to grad school, that I stopped in antique shows and kind of got bit by the bug again. So, and it was during my time in grad school. So I was very interested in neuroscience. I thought I would get a PhD, which I spent 5 years in a program working on a doctorate that I didn't finish. So I don't have it. So I did all the work for it, but then I knew that I wasn't going to finish it. So by the time I got 5 years in, I had already set my sights on a career in the toy industry. So I just didn't want to be a scientist and stumping for grants and things like that. And I didn't think my skills were up to the challenge of being a computational neuroscientist. So basically, a few years earlier, while I was in graduate school, I was also a huge collector of GI Joe, buying, selling, advertising in a magazine that was out at the time called Toy Shop Magazine. So I used to run big ads in that. It was then I realized I really wanted to be in the toy industry. I felt my instincts were right. I would look at the toys that were out there at retail, and I would say, I know what makes this fun. What makes this fun? It makes this not fun. And basically I contacted Hasbro. And this was back in the early 90s. I wrote them a letter. I started going to the first GI Joe conventions, which were held in Burbank, California, put on by a guy named James DeSimone. And those were great shows. And Hasbro eventually caught the attention of Hasbro. They sent their guys out. Kirk Bazigian and Vinny DeLeva went out to those shows, and I wrote to Vinny. And in the early '90s, I said, "How do I work for you? I really want to work for you." I said, I sent him some pictures of some GI Joe dioramas I had created, and this was probably the most amazing turning point in my career. Is Vinny actually called me back and we talked for at least half an hour. It could have been more. And he gave me great advice. So we talked for a while. He said, "What I really think that you ought to be in marketing. Feels like you're a marketer." I said, "Okay, that sounds great. What do we do?" He said, "I can't hire you because you have no experience." And so Vinny at the time was, I don't know if he was vice president of marketing at Hasbro for G.I. Joe then. I think that was Kirk Bozigian, but Vinny worked under Kirk. I think Vinny was director. So he said, I can't hire you at Hasbro. You don't have any experience. But my recommendation to you is to just go get marketing experience. If you're serious about this, go get any marketing job you can. Just start working on it. Get skills, get the understanding of what it takes to be a marketer. Market something. I said, "That's awesome advice, Vinny." And I took that advice. And I left graduate school after 5 years and into the program, and went out to California, and where my wife at the time had gotten a job. And luckily, I got hired at Atari. A wonderful woman named Mary Fujihara hired me. Took a chance on me. I had been playing a lot of the console games then, Genesis, Sega, Nintendo. And, I don't know, whatever she saw in me, didn't have any experience, but she said, "I think there's something there." She took a chance on me, hired me. And that became the start of my marketing career. There was 1 year in there where I was in Los Angeles working in marketing research, which was a good transition, but it was really at Atari that I think I found what I was great at, which is working with creatives and adding value to, tons of value to what they're doing and creating what we now call intellectual property. So back then it was just video games that you were making, but I said, we can take these, we can license them, we can go create toys and comic books and, surround what you're doing with a bigger program. And that's what I was able to do for Atari games. So what Vinny suggested turned out to be exactly the right advice, which was go get marketing experience. That's what I was, and then I got very lucky to land at Atari. So I owe so much to Vinny. He's heard the story endless times. My thanks. But I owe my career start to some great advice, which I always pass along to other folks. If you're passionate about something, go get experience in it. It doesn't have to be in the exact same industry, just a related industry, get that experience. So that's kind of how I transitioned from science to get my start in brand management.
Well, you went through about 10 of my questions, Derryl. So it's like you had a psychic reading of my brain as to what I was going to ask you. Or you've been through this before and you have this down pat.
Well, there's a lot of explaining to do when it comes from how I got to point A to point B. So, and a lot of luck. And, I think for a lot of people, especially who want to be in the toy industry, I know it's inspirational and inspiring. So I like to give that advice. And, I've been approached countless times by people on how do I get into, marketing at Hasbro or another company. And so I'm happy to give them advice because clearly the advice I was given led to the job of a lifetime, my dream job. So, I hope other people can achieve that as well.
But you have to admit that it also comes down to circumstance as well. I don't believe in luck or bad luck, but I do believe in circumstance. And you had the right circumstance that led you on the right path.
I think you can make your luck along the way. So I do agree with you to a certain extent. Like I I believe I owe my career and my where I am to a few lucky breaks. But I also think you make those breaks yourself by being in the right place at the right time, by being a good person, and and definitely and create relationships when you go, that relationship with Vinny and really paid off. So it's just be a great person too, keep your eyes open and listen to feedback, be very constructive in feedback. My professor at, when I was in my graduate school program gave me great feedback. He says, you're not into this. Like, snap out of it if you want to be this. And my head was elsewhere. Sometimes it's great to quit too. That's another thing. It's, if you don't enjoy something, if you're not thriving, quit. Find another thing that you're passionate about. Find another way out. Get out of that circumstance. And so I wasn't afraid to quit or leave behind. I had zero guilt about leaving behind, 5 years in a PhD program, because I was convinced that that wasn't the right thing for me, that something else was, and I wanted to make that work. So,
But I think you kind of took some of that schooling with you, because neuroscience and psychology and stuff, you kind of need those things in the toy industry, because you're trying to figure out what these little rugrats would buy, or what they are interested in, and what their psychology of their little heads are.
that's
And
right.
marketing is a little bit involved with that too, I would say.
Well, I knew, prior to going Hasbro, I wrote my first book, the collectible GI Joe. That came out. I started at Hasbro in 2001, and the collectible GI Joe came out in 1999. And I knew going in to Hasbro that I would carry a lot of baggage with me. That baggage would be that this guy's a collector. He's going to want to do like what he wants to do to make cool toys that he wants. And so I was very aware of the perception, and also for people like me who get their dream job, who are offered their dream job, you have to be very careful. You have to navigate that with an objective framework. Like, you are a marketer, you can be guided by your insights, right? And I had a lot of insights over, what people wanted, what makes it cool. And that really paid off, especially on Star Wars, I think, in my time over Star Wars. But I was also very careful and cognizant of my perception that what I was doing wasn't motivated by self-interest, but it was motivated in what's objectively best for Hasbro's business. And I think that guided me very well later, through the course of my career. Part of that is, as you say, being very objective, putting aside subjectivity, but also my career, prior to that career as a neuroscientist, 5 years spent in a very quantitative field. It gave me a lot, and also my time at Atari, eight years I spent at Atari. So it gave me a very quantitative foundation for doing market research, listening to fans, figuring out what the real signal is in a field of noise, and guiding myself by, it's now called consumer insights, but, we're very rigorously quantitative things, which I felt very comfortable. I felt very comfortable with numbers. Not a lot of my peers who come from, marketing backgrounds are as much. I was super comfortable, surrounding myself with that, commissioned a lot of research. And that was, I think, key to showing Hasbro that I was a serious brand builder, interested in driving, the financial health of brands, creating bigger brands, and not, a fanboy who got their dream job and just decided to do all kinds of cool stuff. Although I did more than my share of that. I think I broke a lot of practices at Hasbro because of that, but that's another story.
Well, so that brings us, because now we're all the ways up to the good stuff. This is what the viewers want to hear. It's GI Joe time, folks. So we're gonna find out developing ideas and stuff like that. Where do you obviously you have to start someplace, so you have to start with a nugget of an idea and then kind of grow it and build it. And but where do those nuggets come from? Everybody at Hasbro must have them, and you have to figure out, oh, that's a good nugget, that's a bad nugget, that's a clunker, but whatever, right?
Yep, absolutely. So when I came into Hasbro in 2001, almost all, in fact, I would say all of the original Joe team from the 80s and 90s was gone. They weren't there anymore. All, what we had, some engineers were there, but no, and just maybe a couple designers, like Wayne Luther was there, which was amazing.
Wow.
So Wayne Luther is, it's new,
Ace?
it's Failsafe in the new Sky Striker.
You're right.
Yeah, he's in the new Sky. It's called Wayne Ruffle. So they flipped his name. But anyway, so Wayne was there, but he wasn't working on G.I. Joe. He was, very high in design. So we didn't have anybody who had continuity to the original line. G.I. Joe was shut down. The 3 3/4 G.I. Joe versus Cobra line, as we know it, was shut down in 94. I came in 2001. Meanwhile, the Cincinnati team had restarted G.I. Joe a couple of times. There was G.I. Joe Extreme, Sergeant Savage before that, some desperate attempts. But then the Cincinnati team had successfully restarted the 12-inch G.I. Joe line in what's called the Classic Collection. So that was what was at retail. When I came in 2001, one of my very first meetings at Hasbro, where the team presented ideas, and I came in as director of G.I. Joe. The team presented ideas to the management team at Hasbro, which was led by Alan Hassenfeld. So we put our plan together, and the plan was to continue the great work that the 12-inch team, that Classic Collection team, had done. Oh, Kurt Groen, by the way, was still on the brand, so that was great. He was still doing some work with the team, I think, maybe. But anyway, so we put our plans together, and I still remember it vividly. We were in what's called the tank at Hasbro. It's called the Tinker Tank, but it was called the tank. It's the room that Stephen Hassenfeld created and commissioned for the presentation of all of the brand reviews at Hasbro. It's where all the presentations happen. So we were in the tank presenting. Across the table was Alan Hassenfeld. We got up there and said, we're going to do this and this and this, and it was all very good stuff. The 12-inch team nailed it. And then we also knew that we were going to relaunch 3 3/4. That was the big news. So the G.I. Joe versus Cobra storyline. In 2001, up to that point, it had just been a small retail exclusive line that our exclusives team had created. It's that flame packaging, if you remember that.
I call it the retro line because all they did is repaint the original stuff and put them in 2-packs and 3-packs, and
that's it. Those 2-packs and 3-packs
paint jobs on the vehicles and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So my part actually, so I take it back. There were a couple of people from the original design team. David Kunitz was there. So Dave Kunitz, who designed a lot of those great vehicles, and then in the 80s and 90s was there, and he was my counterpart along with Brian Wilk, who did a lot of that, what you call the 2-packs and 3-packs, that retro line. So we were all partners. We put our line together, and then we presented it to Alan, and we said, "And Alan, our plan is this was in 2001, actually beginning in 2002. Alan, in 2003, we're going to relaunch G.I. Joe versus Cobra." I remember being so proud, like we were so excited, like, Alan, we're going to relaunch this brand that, your brother Steven launched, that helped build the modern Hasbro. We thought this was the greatest plan in the world, that we put that out on the table, gave him just a tease, like a logo or something like that. And then I remember So as the leader of the team, I presented this, and I remember Alan almost got up out of his seat, and he almost came across the table at me. He said, "You will not." And I'm like, "What?" He says, "You're going to launch this year." Or effectively, he said, "You've got 12 months to launch G.I. Joe." So he loved the idea, but gave us an almost impossible time horizon to do it. Loved the idea so much. It was long overdue. Here's a team that says we're gonna do what the fans want, what the time is right to do. But he says, "You're gonna do it faster." And that was one of the greatest memories I've ever had.
Doesn't that make sense? 20 years after A Real American Hero, 20 years after the original launch. It's like every 20 years, the thing gets relaunched for a new audience, whole new idea. And that's where your new sculpt era comes from.
Yes, that's where, exactly, David. So that's where new sculpt comes from. So we had very little time to get it done. But we started immediately working on it. So back to your original question of where do ideas come from? Relaunching G.I. Joe versus Cobra, not an original idea. Brian Wilk and his team had done it in the retro line. We just amplified it onto a national stage. We took it from a retro line to a big national line that was going to have an advertising budget it was going to be big. I see it behind you. There it is. There's Duke. You got some of the G.I. Joe versus Cobra line. So we told Alan basically we're going to go big, but that's where the retro sculpts came from. The retro sculpt era started pretty much because when we presented to Alan, we didn't know exactly what we were going to do, except the time period we really wanted to do it. It was designed, the time period was originally designed to make sure that we were fully baked, that we had thought of everything, that it was really tight. We didn't have that. Instead, we started immediately on a line. The design team, almost to a person, had come from Cincinnati. I think almost all of them had come from Kenner in Cincinnati, which had been folded. The Cincinnati office had been closed, and that team had been brought to Rhode Island, and they were running the boys' development. So I was working not with an original Rhode Island team, but with a transplanted team of Kenner folks. And they had very specific ideas. So I knew what I wanted to do was something that was equal to the original O-ring articulation of G.I. Joe, as if like when the G.I. Joe line stopped in 94, there was a lot of wacky stuff, but taking the core of that, the O-ring figure, that's what I wanted to continue. The Kenner team had a different idea, the folks I was working with. They said, "No, we don't want the fans telling us what we want to do.
What?
We're going to tell the fans what they're going to want, what they're going to get." And basically that's how we ended up with the new sculpt. I remember product lines where, product line reviews, I was the only person in the room saying, "This is a mistake." Because if you remember, those first figures came out with lower articulation than the originals. And, especially gone was the O-ring. The crotch was like a T, whatever you call it. Not a T crotch. It was like I don't know. It was like an old school Star Wars crotch.
They're like the Battle Core figures. I don't know if you ever go into stores or whatever, but Battle Core. They're like Battle Core. They're
like Battle Core. So I knew this was a big step back. I was, at oftentimes the only one in the room who said, "This is a major mistake. We don't have to make this mistake." But I went out and I product marketed the hell out of it.
Oh, yes. It's one of the biggest eras, I would have to say, one of the biggest eras of marketing I have ever seen in the brand. Obviously, I wasn't born in '63, but from A Real American Hero, that was a major marketing push there. This was a major marketing push. And I'll say kind of right now there's a major marketing push, but it's totally different than what you did and what they did in the A Real American Hero era.
Yeah, we actually we had a budget to work with, not a massive budget, but today they don't really have a budget to work with. But back then we did, we had, X amount of dollars for advertising. And my boss at the time, so the guy who hired me at Hasbro, a guy named Derek Stothard, who is at Lucasfilm, so he's vice president at Lucasfilm Licensing. So when I was on Star Wars, the guy who hired me at Hasbro became my peer at Lucasfilm. So Derek, anyway, he came to me and said, "We've got marketing money." He helped secure that from management. He said, "What do you think about doing a CG commercial that's just the story of?" And I thought it was brilliant. In many ways, it mirrored what the original 1982 campaign did, under Kirk, which basically advertised the comic book. Here we were advertising. We created a CG story with our advertising agency that basically gave kids the belief that there was this ongoing, awesome story, exciting story you could jump into. And I thought it was brilliant marketing.
Give me a second. Pull it out of here. Hold on. There it is. Right there, I think. Oh, there it is, right there. Well, I don't know which one came first. Was it, let's see, was it Vala vs. Venom or Joe vs. Corp? I should know this. I'm sorry, fans.
So Spy Troops was the 2003 line. Vala vs. Venom was our 2004 line.
Okay.
So Spy Troops came first, but even before that was a gimmick that we called Sound Attack.
Sound Attack.
Sound Attack. Sound Attack. We wanted to have something that you could wrap your commercials around. We could tell retail an innovation. Nowadays you call it, what's your innovative feature, in your toy? But we created this. I don't remember whose idea it was, but the idea was basically take a weapon, put a little thing off the side that had some depressions that could activate a sound chip. It was basically a binary function. And our design team, I think it was Dave Lewinsky at the time who did all the vehicle designs.
Was this the Phantom of the Menace Star Wars chip reader thing where each figure came with a little chip and you had to buy the chip reader separate and you put the figure on the thing? Hey, it's Darth Vader. Hey, it's
Star Wars. That was actually maybe an RFID technology. This was very simple mechanical.
Oh, okay.
Basically, it was truly binary. It was a great innovation, and I credit Dave Lewinsky and our designer for the vehicles and our engineering team for figuring this out. But if you could I think they're called leaf switches. If you make a little box with some leaf switches, depending on the number of leaf switches you have in there, you could make 2, 4, 8, 16, 32 different individual combinations of like 0 and 1, whether the switch is depressed or not. You depending on what you put in there. And I think we made, if I recall, it was 4 leaf switches, so you could have 16 different sounds. And I think what we did is, I remember our team put out all the sounds. Here's all the sounds we could want. Rifle shot, machine gun, grenade launcher, missile. We figured 16 is good enough, so we designed it so you had 16 different things. And we created this thing called Sound Attack, and it was very simple. And we had it in the commercial. Basically, Duke, I think, loaded, or maybe it was heavy duty in the commercial. They said, let's hit him with Sound Attack. Cobra was beating G.I. Joe, but what's the thing that would turn the tide and beat Cobra back? Oh, it's like Sound Attack. It's just a wall of sound. And then they would load, I remember in the commercial, they loaded the Sound Attack thing into the thing, just like a kid would do. And then it's like, boom, it's like a big concussive wave of sound. that was coming out of that vehicle. And it was awesome. It was like perfect. It was the perfect gimmick meets, kind of functional, cool thing where the kid had control over the sounds, and all the different figures had a different sound attack weapon that you could come with. So anyway, bottom line, we took a simple gimmick, marketed it as Sound Attack, and we were off and running. So 2002 was a great year for us. Simple gimmick, but that helped us get to the following year, which was Spy Troops. Now, to get back to your original question, where do ideas come from? They come from everywhere. Okay. So Sound Attack came from our team, but the next 3 storylines, 2 of which actually came out. And what we looked for is every 12 months, we wanted a new story for retail, because toys is a fashion business. You cannot take for granted that what brought you to the party this year is going to be the thing that kids are still interested in the next year. So we looked every 12 months, we were going to completely change out our line. And that meant changing out the packaging, the name of the line, the advertising campaign, everything. And so we got into this cadence. Yes. Sound Attack.
I love it.
There it is. Sound Attack right down there at the bottom.
I love it.
Over Rattler with Sound Attack. So that's 2002. I remember on a vacation every year I used to take my family back to San Diego to go to Comic-Con. So I was instrumental in bringing Hasbro back to Comic-Con, starting that booth that continues, I think, to this day. I don't know. I haven't been in a couple of years, but I remember leading us back and saying we really should be at this show. And starting in 2002, we went, but I would take my family out on vacation every year. I'm from San Diego. And I remember sitting in my sister-in-law's house in Los Angeles as part of the vacation. And, I was bored. I didn't have a lot to do there. And I just thought, I'm going to write. I'm going to think about G.I. Joe. I'm going to think about the future of G.I. Joe. And every year, that's where I came up with the idea for what next year's line would be.
Wow.
So I remember writing what Spy Troops was all about. I said, spy was always one of those great themes when I was growing up in the 70s with Adventure Team. It was there in G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero with Chuckles. Hadn't been a big part of the comic, but except my favorite character, Stalker, did a lot of infiltration in G.I. Joe Special Missions.
Oh, yes.
So I took that spy theme and I said, there's really something there. We can amplify it, and created this idea of G.I. Joe and Cobra both going undercover, infiltrating. And what do you need to do to kind of disguise yourself? You need gear that snaps on, your characters. And that could be soft goods, it could be plastic bits. So a very simple idea of going undercover turned into the second year of G.I. Joe, which was Spy Troops.
Agent Faces.
What's that?
Agent Faces.
Agent Faces. That was Michelino Paolino. That was our designer on G.I. Joe. So he's Agent Faces. He inserted himself in the storyline big time. And because we had a very successful first year, we got more money to work with in the Spy Troops year. 2003, then we knew going into that we needed to take our storyline out in a bigger way. So we commissioned a Real FX, which was related to our advertising agency in Dallas, to create a movie for us. And they did, created a CG movie, Spy Troops the movie. You've got that there. There it is. There it is. And that was a fantastic process. We were creating the first new original G.I. Joe content, other than commercials we had for, Sound Attack, but the first real content, story-driven content in a long time. So that felt great. It's like we're kicking G.I. Joe up to the next level. And Spy Troops was great. It did great for us. We had, let's see, is that when we had Snake Eyes versus Storm Shadow? That was the year prior. I'm trying to remember the big Christmas driver we had for fall of 2003, and it's escaping me at the moment, exactly what that was. But
creating ideas, going back to that question, But at the time, Devil's Due had the comic book rights, and they had developed a whole bunch of new concepts. You guys just drove home and did tons of stuff with Kamakura,
Yep.
the new Serpentor stuff, all kinds of interesting new characters that were bad, kind of like your spy troops that were kind of good guys, that were bad guys, and back and forth, and new vehicles. And you guys were really simpatico, kind of like, again, with the 80s, simpatico with branding, with the toys, with the comics, all at the same time. That's normally where G.I. Joe is the perfect melding, is when those three things meet. And you had animation at the time. It was a wonderful time.
Yep, it was a great time. We did work with Devil's Due. We wanted to embrace, have a closer relationship with the team. It never got there. I'll be quite honest with that. My time at Hasbro, we never seemed to really get in sync with Devil's Due, and it's because they were given a very specific charter that Hasbro would be hands off on their storytelling. So the brand team, while I could have exerted more of a role, I said they're going to go their own way, do their own thing. We're not going to be very heavy-handed on their storytelling. And we kind of existed in two separate worlds.
That's okay.
But we did, I did see what they were, the genius of some of the characters they were creating, and we wanted to bring those into the line. So we did, like Kamakura, I think, was a very important character in Valor versus Venom. The Valor versus Venom line for us, and also some of the standalone entertainment we did, like I think the Ninja line we did.
Right.
But anyway, so we were looking to what they were doing, bringing some of those characters over. But really, man, we were having such a good time creating new entertainment, although it was standalone DVD entertainment. And I think Spy Troops was actually packed in with the Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow set. That's what it was that year. That was a monster seller. Was that set, the one with the Spy Troops DVD packed in? That was our big showcase item, and that's how it was distributed. I think we did get one showing. We engineered one showing on Cartoon Network where it became the #1 show of the year on Cartoon Network in that specific hour that it was on.
This is what people are trying to say right now. We need content. We need animation. What are you doing, Hasbro?
Well, I would say it's very difficult. It's very difficult now because animated series get lost. You don't get the critical mass. It's so different nowadays, because I was all about trying to market to kids. I knew the fans, like we would do things that the fans would like. But my, drive as a marketer at Hasbro was to build a kids audience, because I knew a brand could not stand alone just with the fan base the way it was. The G.I. Joe versus, Cobra, the kids who grew up with it, they were still maturing into their fandom. A lot of them weren't even fans then. They were too young to be fans. So it wasn't until, a decade later that fan base had really matured. But I knew we lived and died based on our ability to create a kid base. That's the healthiest brand you can have, is when you have kids and then you have fans on top of that.
Then you did this.
Then we did that. So that's Valor versus Venom, right? Yep. So 2004, off the, in the successive Spy Troops, or the anticipated success, we said, what are we going to do next? And whereas Spy Troops was an idea that I had, a very simple idea, generated on vacation, it was the following year on vacation that I really came up with the idea of Valor versus Venom. Now, as you pointed out before, my roots are in science. I went to grad school to work on a PhD, which I never finished, by the way. But for 5 years, I was immersed in science. Science is in my bones even today. And on this vacation, I thought, how can we, knowing that Cobra has this rich history of wackadoodle scientists, like Dr. Mindbender, Dr. Venom before that. Like, what would Cobra do next? And, Serpentor is all about the pinnacle of science, genetic manipulation before it became the thing that it is today. That's the genius of G.I. Joe. It had all of that. The bones were all of it there in the 80s and 90s. I said, what if we amplify that?
But wasn't that the slogan for the original era, Real American Hero era? Always 10 years ahead of the science and technology and military world.
That's right. I think they were 20, 30 years ahead when it comes to genetics. I mean, the creation of Serpentor was an amazing thing. So inspired by that, and I had read all of Larry Hammond's comics, the whole of, how do you say the word? Ouvre, Ouvre. Anyway, I read all of Larry's Ouvre. And then I was just so inspired by the storytelling that Larry had done. And we had brought him back into the fold, a couple years earlier. But so I was on vacation and I just got the idea of like, what was the next evolution of Serpentor? Like, what could possibly be beyond that? And I said, taking Serpentor, but infusing him with like, animal characteristics, right? Or just, the whole animal manipulation thing, not of Serpentor necessarily, but of modifying troopers with selective traits. That I felt was very much, something that Cobra would do.
That's where the training and the monkeys come from, people. If you're wondering where I was going to bring the monkeys into it, there you go.
I would never cross anything with monkeys. Monkeys, and you notice Cobra never did anything with monkeys. It was always like scorpions and vipers that had selective traits. Monkeys are unpredictable, crazy. Anyway, that's it. I do have a pass with monkeys, but I do not recommend crossing anything with monkeys. But anyway, we're enough of an unpredictable monkey hybrid, monkey as it is. But anyway, so it's like all that, take a trait from something that you would want to like put in a human, just that little bit of trait, and make something like toxic or ability to withstand or breathe underwater or something like that. That you have the basis of Valor versus Venom.
Venomous Maximus.
So the successor, successor in spirit to Serpentor was Venomous Maximus, who had that key, I think, 7th ingredient it turned out to be Storm Shadow, I think, was the ingredient, or was it Snake Eyes? I forget.
I think Storm Shadow was in the Larry Hama comics. I think
Storm Shadow was in Larry Hama, right? We had, or might have been Duke, something, or General Flag, something like that.
General Hawk or General Flag, whatever you want to call him.
Flag, Hawk, right? Exactly. So we added that ingredient. So a lot of it was homage to what happened with Serpentor, but we took the idea of Valor versus Venom and spread it across the whole line and said genetic manipulation is something that Cobra's been doing. They want to get an upper hand in the war. Take over the world. And so they're going to make all these crazy troopers. And so that became the basis for Valor versus Venom. So I wrote up everything. I came up with the idea, I created Venomous Maximus and all of that. And on the G.I. Joe side, that's where, we needed a G.I. Joe veterinarian. And that's where Dr. Link Talbot.
I love that character. No one else likes it, but I think, look, with all the original pets in the friggin' era, they needed a veterinarian. Give me a break.
Thank you, David. Who was taking care of all these pets, keeping them in top condition? Where was the veterinarian? G.I. Joe always should have had a veterinarian. Here I brought in one, the consulting Dr. Link Talbot. Now, he didn't get we called him Link for the missing link, right? Because I felt he was the missing link to the original Joe team.
Yeah.
But, so we kind of gave him a code name, but he still wasn't a Joe. And I think that's what a lot of people have problems with. He's not a Joe. He's like an outside guy. He's Dr. Link Talbot, but to me, he's Link. That would have been, that was his code name. So Unfortunately, G.I. Joe didn't last much longer than that, at retail.
But I think you kind of, if you really look at these, if you really look at if you watch Spy Troops, and then you watch Valor vs. Venom, and then you watch my next love, Sigma 6,
Okay.
there is a very loose continuation. It's a thin continuation along all three of those as a continuity. And Sigma 6 went on to do their own series. And I kind of wasn't, I'll say I wasn't a huge fan of Sigma 6 when it came out. All the fans know that I was not a Sigma 6 collector because I felt that it kind of broke the mold. And
Right.
don't get me wrong, I know 12-inch to Super Joe and Super Joe to Aura, they broke the mold every time they did it. New sculpt era to this, to that, So, but that was my thinking at the time. It broke the scale that I was used to for 30 years or whatever, from 82 to 2005 or whatever. So, but Sigma 6 is actually quite an awesome line of toys.
It's an incredibly ambitious line of toys that owes everything to John Warden. So John Warden, the designer, who initiated Sigma 6. So let me tell you a little bit about how Sigma 6 came to be.
Sure.
So Spy Troops led into Valor vs. Venom. Valor vs. Venom had a Paramount DVD launch. It did very well. Like, we had a great toy line. But so G.I. Joe was growing, but it wasn't growing enough for Hasbro to just step back and let us do our thing and keep growing it year after year. Instead, we were doing a lot of work and kind of growing a little bit. But G.I. Joe was also complicated at the time. In 2000, this is 2004. It was a very complex line because you also had classic 12-inch military that was still part of the line. You had G.I. Joe versus Cobra, which also had a 12-inch component to it. It's like the only quadrant we didn't have covered was realistic 3 3/4 military. It's like we covered the other two 12-inch quadrants, fantasy, military, and then Valor versus Venom. It was a very complex line. Brian Goldner, who was president of Hasbro at the time, was, I think, frustrated with like how many different sublines we had as a kid or collect. It was just complicated. He wanted a fresh start. He wanted G.I. Joe to what's called go big or go home. So I had been working on. Go ahead, David.
Can I back up just a smidge? And because I was going to cover this, but you forgot to mention the 2 and 3 pack comic books packs that were also coming out across the line, that were kind of reissues of old characters with fresh new paint jobs, and a lot of comic book related characters that never got figures before. So that was also going on at the same time. So
yeah, that's where.
All this stuff coming out at the same time. And it was a difficult time to be a G.I. Joe fan because you had so much choice. And that's not a bad thing, but you couldn't focus.
We were dealing with audiences that I was unwilling to let go. We had our classic 12-inch military audience. We had our growing 3 3/4 fan base, who initially was super pissed that we did the new sculpts. They hated them. And then, as you recall, part of that story there is like, I was the voice almost in the wilderness at the beginning that said these new sculpts are the wrong thing for fans. We're making a mistake. We don't have to be doing this. But to a person in the room, they said, no, we're going to tell people what they want. And I said, this is a mistake. Almost immediately, we started backpedaling. And we went to an O-ring body. We redid the vast majority of those sculpts that we did in the new sculpt era. We did as O-ring figures, but with varying success, right? So, some of them our sculptors really nailed, some are bad. We introduced, tons of new characters in an O-ring sculpt. And I introduced the comic packs because I thought this was a further way of getting fans into the line. Some of our best releases were those comic packs from that.
And
era.
the club, the mail away club. There was some really cool new versions of existing characters, like that sculpt of Airtide,
That's right.
Guard, all these. They were beautiful new interpretations of characters too.
Yep. And we were doing the Toys R Us 6-packs using the original sculpts. John Boyce, our designer, did a fantastic job on those. So anyway, we were doing stuff that it was old sculpt, it was new sculpt, it was 12-inch figures. We were all over the map. And that was because, I was unwilling to let any audience go. I wanted to make everybody happy.
You did.
And
I think you
as
did.
a result, we might have made nobody happy, right?
No. There's a lot of good. Trust me, I have 90% of the stuff from the late 90s to present, and there was a lot of good stuff. Maybe I'm not the right person, but I love this. I know a lot of people don't like it, but I think it's really cool. It's very cool. Yeah, maybe the missiles were too pink, but who gives a crap?
But it's got that sound attack thing, bolted onto there. So old school people don't like it, right? Pure old school people. Bottom line is, we started off on a bad foot in 2002, and it was I wanted to kind of do the fans right. We introduced a lot of stuff. Some of which was great, like the comic pack line is fantastic. The Toys R Us 6-pack line. Some of the stuff we did in the 2-packs is great. Some of it I wish was better sculpted. We put out a lot of stuff. I was trying to put out a wave every quarter, and we should have stepped back and said we don't need so much. But anyway, bottom line, Hasbro management didn't really understand what G.I. Joe was about, and they wanted a reset. So Brian Goldner came in. He said, we're going to reset this line. And that was the point at which I said, I think I'm done. It's time for me to go. And the Star Wars team saw what we were doing. We relaunched a 40th anniversary line, to great acclaim with the 12-inch fans. They liked that. They wanted to, recruit me over to the Star Wars team. So they started recruiting me to the Star Wars team. I said, this is great. I think I need a break. Hasbro needs a break. It's been almost 4 years. Why don't I take a break? And so turn the G.I. Joe team. Oh, the third storyline that I had created for G.I. Joe that would have followed Valor versus Venom in fall 2005 was called Rise of the Robots.
Ooh, overkill.
The idea was that the battle android troopers had kind of taken over, their artificial intelligence kind of morphed even beyond Dr. Mindbender's control. And the androids, the robots, basically took over Hasbro. Took over Cobra. They took over Cobra, and we're still promoting Cobra's objectives, but we're autonomous and deadly, and they kept morphing. So the whole idea for what would have been like the third year of our storytelling, fourth year if you consider Sound Attack, was all about this amazing artificial intelligence threat that had grown beyond Cobra's wildest dreams.
Man.
And which would have forced at a key climax point, Cobra and Joe to team up against that threat, right? Because otherwise that threat would have replaced Cobra Commander and everybody, all the Cobra lieutenants. So there were some key plot points in there. We never got beyond initial designs and initial storylines. So we never got to make, see where that story would have gone.
That's a shame. I would have loved to have seen that, because one of my favorite characters is Overkill, and he's like the head of the bats or whatever you want to call him. But they kind of lean heavy into him in Sigma 6, which I was happy about.
Overkill was key to that story, and he's kind of like, is he man or machine? Like, you know, is he more one than the other? The other innovative design feature of Rise of the Robots was a modular design to all of the robotic figures. You could take their limbs off, you could completely interchange them. That later, I took that idea and it became
Star Wars.
It became
Factory.
the Droid Factory in Star Wars. In fact, the Rise of the Robots idea was inspired by the original Kenner Droid Factory that I had when I was a kid, where everything had these modular pegs.
Well,
but that would have been the Rise of the Robots storyline. Some of the figures did get released.
First, I want to say that was a 48 slip by you, and the Hasbro robots, and then that old saying, there's no idea ever goes away. You know, you can always repurpose stuff, especially in a toy company.
I've loved the idea of modular toys that you can use to customize. You know, I'm a huge Lego fan myself, but that wasn't the basis for it. But the idea of modular figures that you can customize, put your own stamp on it, create your own storytelling with, you know, that was something that I felt could really work great with this robotic toy line. It became huge when we did it. Took that exact same idea and the same connecting aspect and took that into Star Wars.
Isn't that playability? Don't you always look for the playability?
Oh, yes. Playability standpoint, it was off the charts. For storytelling, it was fantastic. But so that was all in play, and we were working on a series with I think it was a company called Gonzo Animation out of Japan. So we were working on a Rise of the Robot series. So we were going from Spy Troops, which was an Impact thing, to Paramount's Valor vs. Venom launch, a DVD launch, to a full-blown series. So we were on a good track, but it just wasn't big enough and it wasn't clear enough for Hasbro's leadership. So Brian Goldner just basically said, I want to restart. I want a total new focus. That's where you got John Warden coming into the team with his vision of what became Sigma 6. Totally different. The reason it is totally different is because it was designed to be a fresh start, to try and get kids, you know, build that kid base. They took over the Gonzo Entertainment, you know, the Gonzo TV show, redid it as Sigma 6, which is a play on Six Sigma, you know, in engineering, you know, an engineering discipline. And basically, you know, I wasn't involved in Sigma 6. That was all John Warden's. My only involvement came later when I might have actually killed it. When I came back into G.I. Joe a few years later, I was asked to take G.I. Joe back again. They had just launched the 25th anniversary multi-packs. Those were awesome. You know, in 2007, I said, let's do more of those. And let's do less of Sigma 6. Sigma 6 had started to really lose its focus. It was doing Adventure Team Sigma 6 and all kinds of things. It wasn't sparking. So I said, let's take those resources. I want you to do more of the 25th anniversary stuff. So in fact, I guess if anything, I'm responsible for both, you know, helping initiate Sigma 6 by taking myself out of G.I. Joe and then killing it when I came back into G.I. Joe. But the line is phenomenal. I mean, Sigma 6, I don't collect Sigma 6 myself, but I have tremendous respect for what John did and the team did to create incredibly, I mean, those are the most playable toys. They are unbelievably great toys.
Very imaginative, very unique. If you see a Sigma 6
different.
like silhouette in like a shadow with their weapon, you know what that is. And it's a striking silhouette. They look really cool.
It's very striking. Now, I will say I'm always more of a realist. I never liked, you know, when Kenner reinterpreted superheroes with Justice League Extreme and whenever that was, the late 80s one, the muscles rippling. I was never a fan of that. I like realistic looking figures with G.I. Joe and Star Wars. That was my childhood. So Sigma 6, I'm not a fan of the way that the team, you know, kind of animated those figures, the design aesthetic. I'm a huge fan of the play aesthetic and what they did and the accessories and turning the weapon, the weapons case, they made that into part of the play. Part of the marketing is genius. There were so many great things about Sigma 6, but the aesthetic is not my aesthetic. And I always had a sense that kids didn't always like that,
That's the truth. I just gave my answer. I wasn't a kid, obviously. I was 20 in my early 20s, 23, 24, but still,
But then again, kids love He-Man or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It all depends on the entertainment. If the entertainment grabs you, if it builds that audience, kids just go along with it. And the toys, this Sigma 6 toys, I'm not sure they looked exactly like the entertainment. A little bit stylistically, but they were more different.
They were more the cartoon was more of an anime cartoon,
exactly,
animation than the toy. The toy line was definitely more of a bulky toy, a bash and play, as the phraseology is. From my interpretation, when I was seeing it in the store, I'm like, oh, this is a new bulky toy for the kids to just beat against each other and blah, blah, blah. Even though there was a lot of really thought out stuff in there with the case to collect it, and they could keep it with them in their backpack and bring it to school and blah, blah, blah. And then the adventure stuff, some of those adventure sets are extremely expensive and hard to find.
A lot of them came out at the end, and so they were very short production runs. That's the case with a lot of toy lines. The things that come out at the very end, the team wants to get them out, especially the marketers want to get them out, but they're made like with a fraction of what the launches that preceded it were. As a result, they're highly collectible because they're very hard to get. But anyway, so Sigma 6. Not my thing. I did come back onto the G.I. Joe team. I was asked, after I had been on Star Wars for a few years, I was asked to take on more responsibilities. And then G.I. Joe came back to me, and that's the decision I made. And then I was off G.I. Joe just in the blink of an eye after a couple of weeks, because the G.I. Joe movie was coming into focus, and I had to make a choice. Do I want to stay on G.I. Joe and oversee the first movie, The Rise of Cobra, or I had this opportunity in Star Wars. Lucasfilm wanted me focused on Star Wars, and ultimately I got promoted to vice president because of that decision to stay on Star Wars. So I chose the Star Wars path. I also didn't like the script for Rise of Cobra.
Here, give me your opinion. I'm going to be a biased observer. Is that the right phrase? Biased? I guess I am biased.
Unbiased. You want to be an unbiased observer.
I want to be an unbiased observer here. Give me your opinion. I want to see if it matches mine.
Of what?
Of that movie.
Oh, I think it was terrible.
So, as fans, as a G.I. Joe collector, and what we've come to know, both of us growing up as G.I. Joe fans and collectors and stuff like that, G.I. Joe is the pinnacle of human ingenuity, intelligence, capability around the globe. We do not need accelerator suits to push us forward as the ultimate military force for freedom. So that was their biggest mistake.
No, it was not the biggest mistake, David. I'll tell you what the biggest mistakes were. So accelerator suits are just technology. G.I. Joe has always been about technology. So the military has always been about technology. So here's the problem. I read the script in 2007, back when I was brought in to take over G.I. Joe again. And I didn't think the script was fixable. And this is one of my, this may be the first or second great career regret that I have, because what I should have done in hindsight, this is 2007, I was brought into the G.I. Joe team. I remember bringing in Lorenzo de Bonaventura and Eric Hausum and his team into Hasbro. We had amazing meetings. you know, and the script writing team at the time. Like we had massive Nerf battles in Hasbro. It was just a good bonding session. But the script that came back from those initial meetings, I thought was not the script that G.I. Joe needed to restart the brand. And I didn't think it was fixable. My great regret is not, you know, writing down my thoughts, presenting that to senior management and saying, this is not the brand, you know, or this is not the script that this brand needs. Instead, I had open to me a path on Star Wars that, you know, was open. Lucasfilm wanted me to step into a bigger role there. And I took that path. It might have been the easier path, but I basically said, I'll go this way, rather than do something that could have been very easily corporate suicide by saying, I'm going to just blast this script apart and say it's not the right thing for the brand. It wasn't the right thing for the brand for a variety of reasons. One, it was immediately, the movie was too big, right? The G.I. Joe that we grew up, you know, that you grew up with and knew and loved, and that I fell under the spell of with Larry Hamas, was always a small story. It got to be bigger with, the Cobra Civil War and all these things, but you don't get there overnight in the movie theater. You get there by earning your way with interesting stories, very much like what the Marvel Cinematic Universe has done. Character stories that then connect together and get bigger and bigger. So I felt this movie was immediately out of the gate. It was giant. There was this giant base in the middle of the Sahara Desert. All these characters, like it was too big. Like who are the characters that people are really going to care about in this movie? You know, and I just felt they weren't there. The story was a mess. Cobra Commander is an especially important character, and I felt he was just very cartoony. There was hardly anything there.
Some of the continuity was absolutely ridiculous. Duke, Baroness, and Cobra Commander in a love triangle? Who the hell came up with that?
No, it wasn't right. So my great regret is like telling our senior management team it wasn't right. Instead, I chose another path. But it wasn't right for so many reasons. But fundamentally, now you'll see my views towards G.I. Joe in the follow-up film. So Retaliation, which I was a part of. I was given G.I. Joe back after the disaster that was Rise of Cobra. Retail was terrible. So I was given G.I. Joe back. We said, we need you to help fix this. So I was still on Star Wars, but I took that over. And then we rebuilt. Basically, I said, what we need to do is get back to a smaller team of Joes that people care about, that you kind of see them in the trenches, you understand their motivations. That's what we did with Retaliation. One of the first things I did, and I remember saying this, was, we need to actually reset G.I. Joe. It was a sequel, not a reset. Paramount wanted a sequel. It was very clear. So I remember talking to the producers, Eric Hausen, and I said, what if we killed a massive amount of G.I. Joes, just killed the rest of the team and just had a team of survivors that we built from? And I kept thinking, well, there were people off screen that could still survive and you could build your Joe team from. Right. Where was this character? Where was this character? If there's one you really cared about, like Snow Job. We never saw Snow Job, but he could still be out there. He wasn't on the mission, right? But the main thing it was going to be was a reset. And I remember when I proffered that idea, I'm like, what if we killed all the Joes? I'm like, including Duke. And they said, you would let us do that? I said, I think so. I think we need to do this for the story. So it's my fault. Well, and I came up with the idea, and I came up with a visual to describe this. I said, what if we have a character that has all those dog tags, of all the Joes that were killed? And I said, this is what we're fighting for. It was all the dog tags coming out. This is who we're fighting, blah, 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 blah. And that actually became a part of the movie. It's like they actually took that. I said, that's great. They took that, and then that became, Roadblock's signature, like, here are all the dog tags. So he went and got all those. So that was an important part, but it's also comes from the fact. Now, I was thinking, let's reset Joe. Let's kill all these G.I. Joes and just focus, kill this team. A lot of the characters that were killed, we don't know who they were. They were just generic, like G.I. Joes, just like the ones that populated the base. Right?
Green shirts.
Yeah, they were green shirts. So, but I think I was the impetus from Hasbro's side that said what if we did this? But I think on the other end, the Bonaventura Productions end, and maybe even Paramount, they were thinking that we needed to do the same thing to fundamentally reset this story. So while I suggested it,
I know Channing Tatum wanted to get killed off, so that worked.
Channing Tatum wanted out at some point, and so we gave him the out. Said, let's kill dude. So anyway, I think a lot of people were in the same mind. But you see that's maybe the overreaction or the reaction from what the first film was. I came into the second film, I said, this isn't doing what we needed it to do to create this team. And at the same time, we kind of built going from there. At the same time, we had G.I. Joe Renegades too, was on the hub, which I didn't think was this. I came into that as they were getting ready for the second year, and I thought this wasn't the story we need either to get a generation of kids into this epic story that we had of G.I. Joe versus Cobra. It was kind of the opposite. It was flipped of what we needed to do. So I feel very responsible too for helping get G.I. Joe Retaliation killed as well.
But the thing about the second movie, it was a much better movie. I wish it wasn't a sequel. I wish it was its own entity. Everything your instinct, that's what's fascinating about listening to you. Every instinct that you've got is exactly how I would have done it if I was in your footsteps.
I wouldn't do it any differently. I agree with you. I like the movie. I think it's got good characters. I love Dwayne Johnson in that. In the role of Roadblock. I love the idea of a small team on the run. Kind of almost that was what Retaliation was in a little bit, but that then recruits, it goes back and it pulls in those agents, it rebuilds the Joe team, into something that can fight Cobra. And it was smaller. It was a smaller movie. It felt smaller but impactful, important. So
good story, good acting.
It wasn't perfect by any stretch, but I thought building from what we had to start with, I felt we did some good.
I think you succeeded in your goals, because after that period, G.I. Joe is probably, the toy line is probably one of the most, let me make sure I get the right phrasing, the most successfully accepted period of the brand in its history. The sculpting, the packaging, the whole, that period right there for what, 2013 to 2015 or whatever it was, 11 to 15, that was one of the best received G.I. Joe periods of the toys.
Yeah,
from all my experience and the people I've talked to, they absolutely love that period.
It was good, with a few exceptions. I mean, we put some low articulated figures into the vehicles, which I knew was a mistake. But also I accept responsibility because we were in dire straits from a cost standpoint, But anyway, we made some mistakes. But thank you. That the credit goes to the team, John Warden, and and the team in LA, in Burbank. My partners there did a fantastic job with executing quality products. So it was a quality line, but especially John Warden nailed it. Going from 2011 and the pursuit of Cobra into Retaliation, he did a fantastic job. And then Logan Libera, he was our principal designer. he did an amazing job after, taking that baton pass from John Warden. So Logan did a phenomenal job as well. So
so you're kind of going back and forth with GI Joe and Star Wars at the same time. That's why you got the vice president position, and you're over. But more than GI Joe and Star Wars, you were kind of doing Indiana Jones. You were doing a few other stuff in the mix there too.
I was doing too many things, way too many things. Yes. So it was a very successful period. I love this period, but I was burning the candle at both ends. So I relaunched Beyblade Generation 2, Indiana Jones. I was also working with Universal on Jurassic Park, should there be a new Jurassic Park movie. So laying the foundation, keeping a good relationship there. I think at the time, at my peak, I was working on 10 brands a day. Wow. And some days my day would start at 6 a.m. I'd be in the office at 6 a.m. on a conference call with Japan or Beyblade or some other line that we were doing. We launched, there were some other lines in there too. And it would, it'd end at 6:30 or 7 at night with another conference call with Japan as they were coming in. So it was, in between there was Lucasfilm, and it was such an exciting time. I had a great team, working, with me, under me. But it was unsustainable for me. I was getting very stretched, and ultimately, I don't know if I've told people outside Hasbro of this, but I actually quit. I quit multiple times. One year, I remember one year I quit and they said, we're not going to have it. What can we do to keep you? I was just burnt out, classic case of corporate burnout. And then I think 2 years later, the same thing was happening, quit again. A couple of years later, same thing. I quit 3 times, but Hasbro wouldn't have it any of the times. But until finally they did decide, enough of you, you're going to be gone. So fall of 2018 in a big Hasbro, corporate layoff. They decided the time was now, the time was right for you to go, and I agreed. So I got
had a lot of really good, talented people working with you. You had Mark Weber working with you and stuff. And I've spoken to him in the past and stuff, and he kind of reiterated that you love this job and you love doing the job, but it was a lot for any one person to try and do. It was. And I worked with Mark on some of the very lowest points in GI Joe's history. I think when Mark was on my team, GI Joe was just on fumes. It was maybe a Toys R Us line at best. 50th. Nothing to work with. And but we wanted to make sure that GI Joe didn't fade from that. There was nothing at retail for GI Joe, because the last time there was nothing at retail for GI Joe was 1981. Those dark years in 77, 78, 81. Since when GI Joe launched in 82, there was a continuous presence, a continuous line of GI Joe at retail, even though it changed. It might have been Cygnus, it might have been GI Joe Extreme or Sergeant Savage, but the 12-inch line was always there as well. And I was just desperate that GI Joe just didn't go away at retail under my watch. But eventually, it did. It was so small, it was just a Toys R Us exclusive line. But I consider that a main line. Pardon me? The 50th anniversary. 50th anniversary was something that we put together. It was when was that? 2014. Yeah. I think we strung together just a few items to create a 50th anniversary line. I mean, GI Joe should have had a much bigger presence than it did. But, so anyway, Mark was very passionate about trying to get things done at the time, working with very little, to be honest. But, one thing we did do was we were working with IDW on the combined universe of Hasbro brands. That was a highlight. That was really fun. Can I
bringing in.
can I bring up a point of contention that I have about that combined universe that
Of
bothers
course.
me? Sorry, I don't want to have any negativity, but this thing really bothered me. And since we've got through 90% of all this stuff, I want to bring up a point of contention. The San Diego Comic Con set that had
Yes.
ROM, Micronauts, the Roadblock from Renegades. It had Scott, what's his name?
Mask.
Jeff Fire.
Yep.
It had
Transformers mask.
who else? Action Man. And that's a cool thing. You put him in one of the multi packs in the 2000 mid 2000s Action Man, which I have that. And
Right. Matt Track. Right. Yes.
So Action Man, you had a zombie. I think, yeah, a zombie. I love those zombies. God, I wish you could have did that. Would have been a cool continuation of the other stories. If you couldn't do the robots, do the zombies. That would have been awesome. But I love the zombies that came out. That was cool. That was from Renegades too. The zombie.
That's right.
That set, the fact that you put in a second Matt Tracker instead
Yes.
of the main villain of the story that was bringing all these brands together, Miles Mayhem. Why not? You already did my Matt Tracker. We needed his opposite.
Well, Matt Tracker was featuring heavily in our combined storytelling. So we did a lot of work on the Hasbro combined universe. We had a whole writer's room in LA, and it's all about Matt Tracker leading that team. So Miles Mayhem may have been the bad guy flavor of the whatever, but we had to get Tracker in there. That was key to the storyline. So that's why he was in there. We didn't do Miles Mayhem. I love that set. I thought that set was
it's a fantastic set, except for that one, in my opinion, one thing. But at the time, was the pressure to do, I don't know, I got to make sure I'm careful about my phrasing on this. Cross pollination of ethnicities and racial. That was that a big thing at the time? Because you changed his ethnicity to African American.
Yeah, there were a lot of things discussed in the writer's room about taking what could be just a homogenous world and really diversifying it. Because a lot of things were discussed about who the actors would be, who would play this person, that person. So some of the decisions that IDW made, I think, took their cue maybe from those discussions. And we weren't as precious, right, in creating a world. The funny thing about that Hasbro combined universe is, Hasbro announced a press release way back when. This goes a long way back. That I think Brian Goldner put it out along with Paramount that says we are going to create the Hasbro combined universe of storytelling. This was a very clear reaction to the success that Marvel was having with the cinematic universe, and it was felt that given Hasbro's richness of brands, that this is something that we should be able to do as well.
Yep.
But beyond G.I. Joe and Transformers, hardly anybody in the world really knows Micronauts. Mask is a very niche brand. Action Man had faded from glory long ago. All the things. Nobody knows Visionaries, right?
Oh, Visionaries, that's right.
That we brought together all these things. But so Brian said, we're going to create this world of storytelling. And we knew it's going to take years. It took Marvel years and years and years, a decade or longer to get to that point. So, I remember telling Brian, I said, Brian, we can do this next year using IDW, who was very eager to get at some of these characters with the storytelling. They already had the rights for G.I. Joe and for Transformers. We said we can let them have Mask, Micronauts, Visionaries. I don't think we had Stretch Armstrong in that set. No, we didn't. That was a separate series coming in Cartoon Network. But if I had my druthers, I would have put Stretch Armstrong in there too. Wow. But Action Man, all these things like you say. So wow. We said, this is fantastic. We'll show Brian how it can be done. but I don't think the respect was ever there for, for what IDW really did. They did some great work, but I don't think, Brian's vision wasn't a combined universe in comics. It was a combined universe on the screen, which never materialized, and unfortunately for him.
You know how the old saying, you can armchair quarterback any football game or whatever, and you can go back and say, oh, I would have did this, I would have did this, blah, blah, blah. You're the guy that makes those decisions. We can do this, we can do that. Here, Brian, there's a way to do it. The fans and I have talked about it. You had already built-in connections, in like the Inhumanoids. Ace got disfigured, his jet went down, and he was in Inhumanoids. Lady J's and Flint's kids were in G.I. Joe Extreme with Claw. There was Old Snake in the future with Transform. There were connections. They were there already existing. If we have the imagination to look at our brand, what our brand has done over the decades, and not try to reinvent things whole cloth constantly reinvent.
A lot of those are challenging from, a rights standpoint, or they were homages and they were all done for the fans, never overtly acknowledged. You can't always do those things because of rights issues. But, and this wasn't the first attempt at a Hasbro combined universe. Prior to me working with Michael Kelly of Hasbro Publishing and IDW to actually do it, there were other, things the Bibles that were created to take all of Hasbro's properties and combine them together in, different combined universes. So it wasn't the first one to propose it. We were the first one to actually do it, to embrace it and do it. But unfortunately, it wasn't what Golden wanted to see, which was a universe on screen, not a universe in print. He really wanted to see it in the movies. So while IDW did some great work, and I remember working with John Barber and the team there at the time, it ultimately it fizzled out because there wasn't enough corporate momentum really behind it, and there wasn't enough progress on those other movies that were talked about coming out of the writers' room. It just didn't go anywhere. So I still don't. To this day, I don't know what's going on, if anything, with some of those properties that we worked on.
There was originally going to be a Micronauts animated series, and apparently they did do a season of episodes, but it's like buried somewhere. No one knows. They only have stills of it or someplace in Japan.
I worked on it. I worked on all of season 1 and the beginning of season 2. So I know, I've seen a lot of it, but I don't know. I guess it's never going to see the light of day. It had some really cool stuff in it, I must say. Micronauts, I think, was on the verge of becoming a really good breakout hit. We had some neat technology. I won't get into it in case Hasbro ever does anything with it, but there was
this would be the perfect time to bring it out with Ant-Man and Quantumania right now. And Hasbro's all about jumping on bandwagons. They've done it for their entire history.
Right. Well, and Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania is more about subatomic stuff, not submicronic things.
I kept trying to look in the crowds of the creatures and stuff back there in the bar and this and that to see if I could see Baron Karza back there somewhere, or Bug or somebody. Because they're supposedly reinventing the Guardians of the Galaxy. Maybe Bug will come out of the Quantumania and join the Guardians. Who the hell knows?
I think that's Mantis.
Mantis. Oh, well, yeah, Mantis. But Bug was in the Guardians comics.
Yeah. Bug was.
Andy Lanning and can't think of the other guy, but they did use Bug. You pretty much, I've got to give you credit. You pretty much hit every question I had, except for one. And this is, I know we've talked about where there was an impetus for this, and you guys wanted to do this. Classified 6-inch GI Joe figures, maybe not classified, but 6-inch GI Joe figures. You and your team wanted to do this, and you were told,
Yep.
"Nah, that's never going to work."
Yep. So I was separated from Hasbro in fall of 2018. And for 3 or 4 years prior to that, I had proposed to Hasbro management that we can relaunch GI Joe. And to fully, to do it right, we would need the resources to launch a 6-inch line. It wasn't called classified then. We just said GI Joe 6-inch, or maybe we had another code name for it or something like that. So because we knew that 6-inch was what the fans were really collecting. Black Series 6-inch was red hot, following Marvel. Other companies were doing 6-inch. It was extremely successful. It's a no-brainer. But GI Joe being the state it was in, with no sequel movie on the horizon, no budgets to work with, this was a little tiny brand that was scrapping to get a Toys R Us exclusive line, using primarily, found parts, existing parts. There's no way we could launch 6-inch unless there was a marketing moment to back it and a budget that came with it. So while it was out there, and I remember, telling everybody, this is really what we need. It wasn't until, until the Snake Eyes movie really came along that it gave, it was that marketing tentpole that the brand needed. So I was gone from the company at that time. I had done foundational work on Snake Eyes, the movie, like creating the Arashikage Bible that I, had created to give to the studio and the writers and things like that. So some of the foundational work I had done on the movie, but the toy line itself, we did research, bringing in a lot of fans and a lot of kids on what they would want to see in a toy line. And I felt those, the 6-inch line was going to be great. It just needed the money put into it, but otherwise it would take off. But some of those decisions that were made based on that research, I thought, were incorrect. At the beginning, like if you line up and you show kids like 6 different boards, I think this is might have what we did. You showed them like classic GI Joe versus like futuristic gun-toting laser heavy guys. You show them a whole range and everything in between, and you say, "What do you like?" Kids will go to the biggest guns and go, "I love that," big blasting things because it looks really powerful. And that's what we got. Kids don't know about the original character designs. Fans do, but kids just want a more futuristic thing. And so that's what happened with 6-inch, basically. It's like the team, there were, I reported to a guy and there were other marketing guys. I said, "I really don't think this is the right thing to launch the line." But they said, "Look, this is what kids want." I said, "But this isn't a kid targeted line. This should be a fan targeted line," and basically there aren't any kids collecting 6-inch classified. But the first wave or two were influenced by those focus groups we had where, the designer said, "Look, kids are saying they want futuristic versions of the GI Joes. We're gonna do a hybrid kind of line." Fans said, "These designs don't mean anything to me. These aren't the characters that I grew up with. So what are we looking at here?" Right? It was a launch trying to go towards the future, but I think fans spoke loud and clear that what they wanted was a celebration of the past. And that's what happens when you do market research and you kind of get out of it what kind of you want to do, your justification is for it, rather than really listening to the group that is going to be the target for what you're buying.
I thought the original, the first 5 or 8 figures were actually quite good. I like a bit updated modernization of the existing characters. We got that kind of with the new sculpt. We got that with Sigma 6. We got that with different versions in the movies and Resolute. that was your ultimate GI Joe, Resolute. And I think there is a fan base for that. I think you can pepper in those versions if you wanted to, Hasbro, and also do the other ones. Look, Black Series, they do. There's all kinds of different things. They're doing the Clone Wars. They're doing Renegades. They're doing.
But everything is rooted.
Movie,
everything is rooted in entertainment. In Star Wars, everything has an on-screen analog, whether it's movie, TV, video games, comic book. It's part of the story. With this line, I think if you're starting, there's no entertainment for GI Joe that's coming out. There was a future movie, but this had to earn its keep on its own, on the shelves, and to do new designs that kind of tied to the past, but really you couldn't relate to them because you didn't know what story they connected to or where the line was going. I think it does cause a lot of confusion. And they were launched thinking that kids would love it too. But that was a very misguided approach. There's no entertainment to get kids hooked into the brand.
I think Operation Blackout was the only kind of connected thing, and it really wasn't 100% connected because it came out way later.
Yeah. And in fact, you could have probably done the opposite. Introduce those new designs once you had, kind of established the line and said, we're doing a future force or something like that to take G.I. Joe into the future. I think it would have been very permissible. But out of the gate, I think the fact that the team backtracked very quickly, they listened to the response that fans gave them, that they didn't want to see that. It's too early to do that. At some point, I think G.I. Joe may have to do that, may have to start evolving from the framework they're in. But I think right now it's clearly a celebration of the greatest designs of the past. So they've wandered. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean
to say, they've had to walk that back, just like we did with the original New Sculpt era. Walk that back to a better product for fans. We never got that ability to do that. They, however, did it with Classified very quickly. They pivoted very quickly. They were right on. They were able to address that, and really right the ship, and give fans what they want.
There's a Star Wars brand. I think it's the only brand that Hasbro was doing like this. The Mission Fleet. I think that would be an absolutely beautiful brand to do as G.I. Joe. I think it's 5 points of POA. It's bash and play, bulky kind of figures, and you did that with the little ones in the
Sigma 6.
Yes,
Sigma 6 had a line like that.
People like those a lot, actually. I know a lot of fans like that.
I don't know how Mission Fleet is doing, but sometimes these lines are in betweener. Is the beautiful thing about the 3 3/4 Star Wars line and G.I. Joe line that followed it they were equally about the characters and the vehicles. And if you ask Kirk Bozigian, he'll say it was all about the vehicles. The reality is the vehicles made a lot of money, and they became the focal point of advertising, right? They were big things that kids dreamed about. They were the things under the Christmas tree. But it's the armies that really propelled that storyline and made that work. Things like Mission Fleet are trying to introduce vehicles at an affordable price point. But I don't know if they ever get enough momentum of the characters to really fuel the world of play. That Star Wars is a very rich world of characters. It's a rich world of vehicles. It really needs to have both. The unfortunate reality is that the costs today have forced the vehicle prices up to really untenable levels where you can't keep those vehicle lines at retail or in a way that parents can afford to get them to stimulate the play pattern. It's really tough. it's very tough nowadays.
So that kind of brings me to the end, and I would like to know what you feel the future of not only the GI Joe brand, the toy world, the toy companies, the toy industry as a whole. Would you mind giving me your insights where you think the future might go?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't share the most optimistic point of view on. So I've always been about play, stimulating play, thinking about play, and I looked at the toys. I eventually came to a point in my career at Hasbro. I was there for 18 years. The last few years I had on my whiteboard at work, I wanted to really find out like what is our mission, our purpose? And Hasbro has a mission and a purpose. It's like to make the world a better place, very lofty goals. And I'm like, I want to connect to that. What are we doing? And I came back to thinking in a large part about what Star Wars and G.I. Joe did for my childhood. Like, why did I love these toys so much? And I finally came to the point that what toys are tools. They're tools that allow you, a consumer or a kid or a fan, to take something and tell a story with it that you can play when they're played with, not when they're just put on a shelf. But when you play with it, it's a way for you to express your own personal storytelling. Whether that's you're recreating a scene from the movie or you're creating an all new story, as I did when I was a kid. Toys are just tools for you to unlock your imagination, to let you create your own storytelling. So my mission statement was, I am empowering personal storytelling. And those are the last years that really motivate me at Hasbro. It's all about personal storytelling, whatever I could do to empower that. And that's really where I am with kind of the state of the industry today. Like, I know a lot of the older kids who used to be like action figure kids who grew up playing with action figures, that generation doesn't exist anymore. They just don't. Those kids have gotten older, younger. They just moved to a digital experience
Pokemon
versus a tangible play experience. They're gone. So it's very difficult for toy companies to create, and especially for brands like Star Wars, which have traditionally been older skewing because of the complexity of the storylines. They just don't have the audience anymore. So it's difficult for toy companies to actually cater to that, to create lines, to invest in lines that actually will pay off with a substantial audience. That's why you're seeing things like Mission Fleet that are younger targeting. The costs have to come down. Everything has to become, it has to be more consumable. And that leads to a kind of a scaling down of the approach, which I think reduces the magic. But the bottom line is, I think, the action figure aisle, if you want to call it, has changed fundamentally in the last few years, and it will continue to change. I don't even know if it'll exist beyond a few years. Everything is moving to, online sales. And I think the fan base has become a bigger and more important part of the bottom line of Hasbro, of the boys' toy business that they used to have. So we're going to see more and more collector, or fan targeted things, and probably fewer traditional kids figures. And you'll still see the continued focus on $10 12-inch figures, or whatever the price is now, the 5-point of articulation figures, just because in a lot of parts of the world, a kid may get one toy a year and they want an Iron Man or a Captain America or a Black Panther, right? And that's the one they'll get. And, that toy will be very important for them, for their storytelling. But, in many ways, it will probably be one of the only representations of a lot of the characters that are kid targeted. So I'm pessimistic in terms of the future of kids playing with toys, for their own personal storytelling, like it was in the heyday, or 30 years ago, 20 years ago even. But I do think we're going to see more and more fan targeted things, and especially as the prices keep going up, we're going to see more and more box sets of characters that are pushing $30 each for price point. So things are going to get more expensive and more niche probably as time goes on.
And I think the media has coined us as kidults, which I don't care for that phrase, but I suppose it's apt because I'm an adult that is still a kid at heart. So are you, I think.
Yeah.
So where?
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think we're fans. Fans is probably a much better thing. Gives these things that were important to us as kids usually are the things that when people become collectors or fans later in life, it's because they had great memories of growing up of those as kids, and growing up with those things as kids, and they want to go back, reconnect with the happier times when they're adults. So kidults, I guess. It's a weird phrase for me, but fan. We're fans.
You know who created the term fan, or fanboy, I should say? You know who created that? Probably you don't know who created that. A comic book artist called John Byrne.
Oh, okay.
He's the first person to ever coin the phrase fanboy or fan or whatever. Like, okay, that's interesting.
Good for John.
But he was doing it as a negative connotation.
Got it.
Uh,
I didn't know that about John. So.
Yeah. That's John. What are you
Good
going to
for
do?
him.
So where can, because I have had an opportunity to see you for many years over a period of different conventions over across the country, and had the pleasure of talking with you and stuff like that. But where are you able to reach other fans if you chose?
Well, and people can find me on Facebook easily enough. I don't really. I mean, I'm on Instagram. I don't post on really do anything on Instagram. So Facebook mostly. People can message me if they want. But I love going to toy shows, and I'll be at Toylanta in a couple of weeks in Atlanta. That's a big one. And then I'll also be at the G.I. Joe toy show in Louisville in July. I'll be set up there as well. I don't think I'll have I'm hoping to get a booth at Toylanta, but I think they're sold out. I don't think I'll be able to get one. But I have tons of toys that I've collected over the years that I'm just trying to thin out and just not have as much stuff as I've got now. I've got storage units full of stuff.
Why don't you come into Joe Fest? God, you could sell all that stuff in one fell swoop to store owners and people.
I won't be at Joe Fest this year, unfortunately. So I have a conflict, but otherwise, last year I had an amazing time at Joe Fest, and when I go to shows, I'm going around with a checklist of all the stuff that I need to complete my collection. I probably at that one show last year at Joe Fest took care of 66% of all the stuff I needed. That's easy to do if you only have 3 items and you find 2 of them. But no, I'll come with 50 items, and I was able to get tons of them. So that was a great show.
You're one of those guys that's looking for every weapon because you don't have the mint on card complete stuff. So you're trying to find this guy's baton, or this guy's microphone, or this guy's thing for his radio, or whatever. And that stuff goes for boatloads of money.
No, actually, I had them all at one point, but somehow along the lines, I lost a baton, or I lost this, and I can't find them. I used to have all my weapons in a big box, and I can't find them, so I'm having to pay extraordinary amounts of money to replace them. But I opened them all originally. That's why I had them, and it pains me that I'm having to buy them again. But it is what it is.
But you're a guy that's a frugal guy. When you were not growing up, as you were going through your school years and your work years and stuff like that, you've told me in the past you're not a guy that's splurges and does all this stuff. You bought toys, but that's it, as far as I'm aware. Maybe you took your wife on a vacation or two. I don't know.
Yeah, we definitely did that. But yeah, I pretty much buy, toys and comics and magic cards and all kinds of stuff. So I'm into Disneyland history and all that stuff. So I'm in a whole bunch of stuff.
And I know at Kentuckiana last year, I could not take you away from your phone. You were playing that game on there, which I heard you helped develop that game, which I didn't know that.
No, I didn't help develop any mobile games.
the phone one where the people were like walking off the cliff trying to find the missing Pokemon or whatever the hell? You didn't?
I do play Pokemon Go, but I didn't have anything to do.
You didn't?
I didn't
Oh,
have anything to do with the design of
oh,
it. I've just been playing it almost since the beginning. My kids got me into it, and man,
that's.
I still enjoy it. 6 years later, almost 7 years later.
I was astonished when I heard that and saw you. I was like, what? What is he playing that for?
Yeah, yeah. There's a good number of Joe collectors too who play it as well. So I like friending them in the game as well. So anyway, fun talking to you, David.
It's been a pleasure. I've been wanting to do this for a minute now, as the kids like to call it. And I can't tell you how enjoyable it was hearing these stories. A lot of them I already knew, but I wanted the fans out there to hear these stories because obviously they don't get to see you that often, and I think they would love to hear you. I would love to get you in a panel and just sit there and talk to you about all kinds of fun stuff in panels. I can continue this interview forever if I wanted, if I felt like it, but I know you have to get back to your wife and your family and stuff, and I don't want to keep you too that much longer. So I really appreciate you spending these 2 hours with me and talking GI Joe, talking your career, talking monkeys. It was fun.
My pleasure. Always good to talk to you, and I hope to see you at the next show, and we can continue from there. All right.
Alrighty. All right, folks. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.